Hey guys, my name is Anderson Senna. Welcome to Brazilian British Official. Guys, today I'm gonna bring to you guys an interview of Mikhaila Peterson talking about the carnivore diet. How important and how healthy is that kind of diet? I just want to share that interview with you guys.
All right, Mikhaila Peterson. Well, I guess it's fuller now. What does a day of eating look like for you? Let's jump right into that.
Day of eating. So strip loin in the morning, strip loin at lunch, and really strip loin at dinner. I basically just eat 3 strip loins a day.
Anything else?
Sometimes I'll have soup, and the soup is literally, it's either like strip loin or something leaner, pressure cooked with salt.
It's like the easiest diet ever.
It's the easiest diet ever, especially if you have an air fryer.
So when did you adopt that method?
Strip loins probably for the last year. Before that, it was basically lamb 3 times a day for 2 years. And then before that, it was ribeyes for 2 years.
Okay. So your predominant focus is like ruminant meats.
It's just ruminant meat, yeah.
Okay. Is there a reason for ruminant meat specifically?
Yeah, so I had all these autoimmune issues, and I don't seem to tolerate anything other than ruminant meat. So I've tried chicken, I've tried wild fish. I can kind of do wild fish. I can kind of do the like soy-free, really organic chicken, kind of, but nothing makes me feel as good as like fatty ruminant meat. So just what I tolerate.
Interesting. So when you're eating, say, a strip, are you devouring the fat as well, or do you have days
Everything.
where just like completely?
Everything. Yeah, I won't eat like all the gristle. But I eat almost everything on the plate with a ton of salt.
What about any kind of like ground beef, ground meat, anything like that? Do you ever?
So I had a period of time where I ate bison for a long time because I've got a histamine intolerance. I don't know if your audience is going to be familiar with histamine intolerance.
It's big right now. A lot of people are talking about it. I just did some content surrounding it because it's huge.
Oh, it was a nightmare. And I think we figured out it was because I was living in a place that had mold in it and my stomach was just a mess. And I think that was contributing to the histamine intolerance. But for the years that I had lamb, I ate lamb and bison. That was because of histamine intolerance because I despise lamb. Like, I despise it. It was one of my least favorite foods before I started dieting, and then I ate it for 2 years because it was the only thing I could stomach.
Interesting. Yeah, it's like, avocados, tomatoes, like these high histamine foods. People don't even realize that it trickles beyond just GI issues. I don't know if have you tried taking, I know you're not a big fan of supplements in a lot of cases, but like the straight DAO enzyme?
I take DAO.
Yeah.
So that's the other thing I added in the last year, and I was pretty against supplements because most of them make me feel worse. Even the vitamins like make me feel worse. I'll get insomnia, or mostly it impacts my mood. So I just didn't take anything. I don't take organ supplements, like nothing. DAO has helped so much with histamine intolerance. So I do take DAO before I eat now. That's been happening for the last year. That's
a really, really big one. I feel like there's a lot more that's going to be coming out surrounding histamine, because I feel like it's one of those things where there's histamine sort of incubators, things that kind of release histamine when you eat them, that you're basically sending your body kind of into overdrive. And then there's just a lack of being able to metabolize it. So it's like there's a triple threat that comes in when you consume something that has histamine, or you're sensitive to histamine.
Or your DAO levels are low.
Exactly.
Like all of it. Yeah, I had all of it. Everything was low, and well, DAO's been great. Yeah. So that's the only supplement really I take other than electrolytes. I'll take electrolytes too.
Gotcha. So if we back up and take a look at sort of your whole diet, what would you say 5 things, if we had to kind of, we can go with whatever number, but let's say 5 things that you've noticed by switching to sort of that lion diet sort of diet, whether it's the bison, whether it's the lamb, whether it's the strip, whatever you're doing, but whatever, from soup to nuts, starting from when you were eating regular foods, and where did you transition? Like, what were you eating before? Because you've tried a lot of things. I know you tried keto, you tried this and that, and then you ended up settling on sort of this, I don't want to call it an extreme version of carnivore, because I wouldn't consider it extreme by any stretch of imagination, but it is a different form of carnivore.
I consider it extreme. I think it's extreme.
Yeah, but we think extreme is cool, so I think extreme.
5 things that changed. So I was very depressed. I started on a paleo diet, and it was a very, very restrictive paleo diet. Like, I wasn't eating nuts, I wasn't eating eggs, I wasn't eating dairy. So it was kind of, and I was in ketosis. So it was a keto diet, but without the dairy and eggs that most people eat. And that worked for a while. Like, I that worked really well for a while. And then when I had my first kid, so this was 6 years ago, it stopped working and a bunch of my autoimmune symptoms came back, which was heartbreaking because I'd stopped all my medications and I'd gone into remission, and then suddenly my symptoms started creeping back, and it was really scary. And that's when I started cutting out more foods, because first I realized, oh, sweet potatoes, I feel worse when I'm eating sweet potatoes. So then I was like, okay, I'll get rid of some of the carbier things I was eating, which, like, sweet potatoes aren't that carby, but I got rid of those. I felt a little better. And so when I eventually went to just eating ruminant meat, I went from eating salad, which was like lettuce, olive oil, apple cider vinegar, like simple salad, to just eating meat. And just from that transition, my depression, severe depression, like crying every morning, being depressed, that lifted in about 6 weeks. I didn't feel good in 6 weeks. I just stopped crying in the morning and was like, that's better. 5 months into it, my anxiety went away. So I had severe anxiety. That went away 5 months in. Oh, and then 5 months in is when I really felt like profound changes. I went from really feeling like I was stuck in my head and like in a version of hell to feeling like I was in heaven, like 5 months into the diet. So a lot of the reason that I'm doing this is for mood. I was diagnosed with major depressive disorder and bipolar at one point, and it was severe. So most of what I'm doing is for mood, but I also had arthritis, so my joint pain went away. Let's see, is there anything else? And then I guess energy levels, obviously. Yeah. I had chronic fatigue syndrome as well, but that actually lifted with the paleo diet before I went to just eating meat. So some of my symptoms went away with the paleo diet, but the psych symptoms really lifted with an all meat diet.
Do you feel like it was more the elimination of things, or perhaps micronutrition that you weren't getting before from, say, the ruminant cuts of meat?
I think it was the elimination of things. Yeah. Because I was reacting, like I react to minute amounts of things I introduce with major inflammatory responses. That'll include joint pain, my skin will break out, my stomach will be a mess, and the brain fog is just terrible. And so I do think it was from eliminating things. And I get a lot of people who are like, well, if you just cut processed foods and just cut sugar, then you'd experience the same thing. But I had already done that and it wasn't working. So I was reacting to things like olive oil and lettuce. I don't think that's normal for people, and I do think that like I'm yet to get to exactly what's wrong with me. All I know is the diet has been working. It's been 6 years now, and it keeps me in remission.
And you have no issue as far as needing fiber. I mean, you have no issue GI related. Everything seems to be copacetic there. Huh?
Everything's been good there until it gets a bit more complicated. Like I moved to Miami and we ended up having mold in our HVACs and didn't realize it. It was like a beautiful new house. And then I started having GI issues and my skin started breaking out. And I immediately was like, it's salt. Like I didn't think it's the air I'm breathing. I thought it's something in my diet. Like, why can't I tolerate these things? I cut out salt for a while. It wasn't the salt. It was the air I was breathing. And that's when I started taking DAO and my histamine intolerance got really bad. So like I was eating lamb at that point and then I was having trouble with lamb. I was like, what's going on? And it turned out it was my air. So now that we've moved and fixed that problem, I took a binder for a while to like detox from mold. That's significantly better. So I don't know if that answers your question. But
It does. Because it's interesting with histamine, you kind of work in the same mast cells, those mast immune cells. They work on a similar axis where mold would react as well. So yeah. For example, like if you look at modafinil, obviously the limitless drug, right? One of the common side effects with modafinil that is talked about is if you have a histamine sensitivity, then modafinil is not really doable.
Oh, interesting.
And when you dig deeper into that, you see the contraindications are typically cats, mold, and food with histamines. I'm like, so they're all seeming to work along a similar axis. I'm not an immunologist, but I'm smart enough to realize that, okay, if we're working like the mast cells that are ultimately at the very root of this entire situation with histamines. So some can speculate that when there's a mold issue, that can kickstart a histamine issue even worse or rear its ugly head, right? So it's like sometimes it's never a one single thing. It's just them stacking on top of each other, working on a similar axis.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
So you sort of coined the phrase the lion diet. Now, why is it called the lion diet? What's the idea behind that?
So I had a lot of people reaching out to me that had similar autoimmune disorders and were very, very like chronically sick people who'd been through the medical system, tried a number of things, and they'd gone on the carnivore diet and they said, oh, it's not working. Like, why is it working for you and it's not working for me? And when I looked at their diet, they were eating a lot of eggs and dairy. And eggs and dairy were one of the most inflammatory things for me. Like grains, especially gluten-containing grains, were terrible. Soy was terrible. Dairy was really hard on me, and eggs were really hard on me. So the reason I named it the Lion Diet, I think partly it was so hard for me to restrict my diet down to that, and it was so isolating, and I got made fun of so much that I was like, okay, I want some strong name for this for people who have autoimmune disorders and need to restrict their diet and are being ostracized by their family. And so, like, let's try to make it cooler. I don't know if I succeeded with calling it the Lion Diet. So that was part of the reason. And then the other reason was to differentiate it from the carnivore diet, because the carnivore diet includes dairy and eggs, and those were very inflammatory for me. And I don't think that that diet works very well for autoimmunity or severe psychiatric disorders because of the dairy and eggs. That's what it looks like.
I agree. I think the carnivore diet has its place for a lot of people by giving them a bucket and a sort of a silo and just some confinement. But if you actually look down at what's happening, some of the things don't add up. Like if you look at autoimmune paleo, for example, there's no dairy, there's none of this. It never made sense to me why carnivore. And I feel like 5-6 years ago when carnivore was being talked about a lot in the early stages, like when keto was a lot bigger, people were more interested in that, carnivore was much more similar to what you're doing now. And I feel like as we've gotten into this quote unquote animal-based, and the lines have started to get blurred. And I have no problem with animal-based. I feel like for a lot of people that maybe don't have autoimmune issues, it's a perfect way to live. But the lines are getting blurred. So people are now thinking carnivore, you're kind of defeating a lot of the purpose, because I think one of the reasons people feel really good on carnivore is because the presence of ketones, because the absence of some of these inflammatory things and the histamines. But then when you start adding in dairy, not that I have an issue with dairy, but especially when you're adding in things like raw milk, which is delicious, I love it, but that's a lot of carbohydrates to a point where you're not really producing ketones. So you're sitting in, I've always called it metabolic purgatory, where you're like not quite producing ketones yet, but you're also not having enough carbs to thrive there. So you're just kind of like, So I feel like metabolically, people might struggle and would do better if they just said, hey, I'm just gonna like choose one path and stick with it.
Yeah, and when I did, so the paleo diet, I hadn't heard of autoimmune paleo at the time. This was 2015 when I like came up with this restrictive diet. I wasn't even really familiar with paleo or keto or any of those terms. But what I did was almost identical to the autoimmune paleo diet. Like it was more restrictive, but that's what initially worked for my autoimmune symptoms. And it was eliminating dairy. I feel like people just like dairy. Dairy was one of the hardest things for me to get rid of. Like I cried when I cut out cheese. I cut out cheese for a month and I tried to reintroduce it, and I had this horrible inflammatory reaction with like, my joints were in such terrible shape. My arthritis came back, my skin broke out. I think I developed a lactose intolerance in a month after cutting it, and I used to eat a lot of dairy. And I wept the next day. It was like, cheese is gone, cheese is dead to me. So I feel like people just like it. And I know a lot of people who've gone on the carnivore diet and they're like, oh, I'm not losing weight. Why am I, like everyone loses weight on this diet. Why am I not losing weight? I'm like, how much cheese are you eating? Like, oh, like that's like what I eat. It's like, okay, that's probably why you're not losing weight.
I think people forget that at the end of the day, like cheese is still processed.
Yeah.
And it's still easy to overeat a ton of cheese. You know, I don't have a problem with cheese. I eat cheese, but I mean, you're obviously in a different
I love
category
cheese.
than I am with what you can eat, right? But it's still possible to overeat and to not lose weight doing carnivore when that is a staple, right? It's like you still have to remember. I think what's nice about what you're eating is even if you're eating the entire ribbon of fat, even if you're consuming every last bit, it would be very, very hard to end up in a ridiculous surplus. Like it's
very hard.
I'm sure it's possible. I'm sure people have done it. I know Mark Bell has talked about how he's like, I've gotten fat on steak before. And knowing how Mark can eat, I can believe that. But most people, yeah, I mean, if you put even the juiciest, fattiest ribeye, it's pretty hard.
Yeah.
You've got enough, well-rounded, lean protein that's there as well. That's kind of superseding what you're getting from the fat. I would say you're probably. Have you ever counted how many grams of fat? I mean, you probably don't even pay attention to that, but have you ever counted roughly how many grams of fat you're taking in?
No. I know that at the beginning of the diet, so when I was like quite ill and went onto it, and that's when I was eating ribeyes, I was actually adding extra tallow to my ribeyes because I was hungry for it. And I think that's because I think I had some neurological damage from being on psych meds. I was on psych meds from like age 12 to 23 on a really high dose of like 2 psych meds. And healing from that was hard. And I've noticed that with people who get on the Lion diet, like if they're on psych meds, it takes longer for them to feel better because they have to recover from that. And people usually eat higher fat. So for about 2 years, I ate really high fat. It was like 80% of my calories were from fat. Now that I've switched to New York strips, I also eat jerky as a snack. I love jerky. It's lower. It's probably more like 70%, as opposed to 80, but I haven't calculated grams.
Yeah, I don't think it's all relative. It doesn't really matter. So it's interesting, because your dad adopted some of this diet for a little while too, or is he still doing?
He's still on it.
Yeah?
He's kind of on it out of necessity. Like, my mom's my mom's on it too. She's very gung-ho about it. But she had tried like going gluten-free, and she was a vegetarian for a while, trying to figure out her gut issues. And so she's all for it. My dad kind of hates it, but it's resolved so many of his symptoms. He's kind of in the same place as me where he can't introduce things without feeling bad. Yeah. So yeah, he's still on it. He's been on it since February 2018. My mom's been on it since January 2018, and I've been on it since December 2017.
And he's doing the same kind of thing, that he's doing the strips, or is he just doing like any kind of red meat?
Strips, yeah. And he's been eating strips for, well, I guess 6 years now. Yeah, wow.
So for him specifically, was he just kind of managing pain? What was his reason for jumping on it?
He had the same kind of psych problems as me, so he was on psych meds for a long time. He was very depressed. That seemed to run in our family. So the belief I had when I grew up was we have this severe depression that hits some people in the family. My great-grandpa had it, my grandpa has it, my dad had it, and I had it. And it was like, okay, luck of the draw. You just have predisposition to this, and you're like low in serotonin, and you're going to have this forever. And so that obviously wasn't true. It was food reactions, from inflammatory reactions for whatever reason. But he used it mostly for that, but also he used it for weight loss because I think he lost 40 pounds on the diet. He had psoriasis, he had GERD, and he had gum disease. So he had some autoimmune components as well. He had peripheral uveitis as well, and that all cleared up.
And it's, and forgive me for not knowing this. I mean, you're both of you guys, you and your dad, and your mom too. I mean, you guys are very hard opposed to alcohol, I'm assuming, right?
No.
No?
I mean, my parents don't drink. I drink sometimes, though. This is also what, like, people poke holes in this diet because they're like, you drink vodka sometimes.
Yeah.
I drink vodka sometimes.
It's also triple distilled or quadruple distilled.
I know. Well, it doesn't
so
like, it's distilled from grain. And I have celiac disease, but I don't respond to it because it's distilled, and it doesn't give me any autoimmune symptoms. Now, the hangover that comes along with 0 carb and alcohol is catastrophic compared to when you eat carbs. But I'm like I said, I'm on this diet out of necessity to keep my autoimmune symptoms under control and like my psych problems under control, and they're under control. And vodka doesn't seem to trigger that. It doesn't make me feel good. It's not a healthy thing to do, but.
Well, it's clear. I mean, you're not doing this diet to be part of a diet tribe. I mean, clearly,
no,
right?
I hated, this was like the universe getting back at me too. My mom was always giving me these whole grain breads and these like healthy things. Now we know that that's not a great idea, but like she was really health focused, and I hated it. And I used to make fun of people who were gluten-free. It was like the California, like ditzy girl who was gluten-free, but like that's not a real disorder. And like, here I am now. Yeah. So no, I didn't want to be part of a diet tribe, but I feel like I was like prideful or something. And then the universe was like, here you go.
For sure. Well, it's interesting. Like once you're producing ketones, people tend to find that the cravings for alcohol tend to go away.
That did.
Yeah.
So yeah, when I was in university and this is when I was still taking psych meds, I was extremely depressed. My diet changed when I went to university, and I was eating like primarily dairy and grains, like pierogies and beer and pizza and Chinese food. And it was delicious. And I felt terrible. And I gained weight when I first went to university. I didn't gain a lot of weight, but I gained weight pretty quickly. I think I gained 20 pounds in the first year. And I was like, what's going on? And it turned out it was from my diet. So that was unpleasant.
I think when you're producing ketones, I don't know, you know who Dr. Chris Palmer is?
Yeah, I love him.
Yeah. Have you heard him talk about the sort of mitochondrial dysfunction and alcohol and how that works?
No,
ethanol?
I haven't.
Yeah, when I had him on my channel, it was wild. So he explains that when you are mitochondrially dysfunctional or metabolically dysfunctional, kind of two terms that essentially go hand in hand, but in people that are alcoholics, people that really feel like they need alcohol to function, they found is that ketones enter the mitochondria in a similar fashion to how alcohol or ethanol will enter the mitochondria.
Wow.
So when you consume something like even a ketogenic beverage, something that has like a high level of BHB, or you put them in nutritional ketosis, they're essentially satisfying this metabolic insufficiency that they would normally satisfy when they have alcohol. So you know, there's these people that are quote unquote functioning alcoholics, like they don't feel normal until they have alcohol. When they are producing ketones or even take exogenous ketones, it satisfies that same quote unquote itch that they would get from drinking alcohol.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, so
okay. Because like I was saying, in university, I drank a lot, and I know a lot of people drink a lot in university, but the reason I drank a lot was because I was in hell when I wasn't drinking. Like, I had chronic fatigue. I was miserably depressed. I could barely control my thoughts. And when I drank, I calmed down and I was like, I can have a conversation now. And so I drank too much, and mixing alcohol with psychiatric medications is not a good idea. But I felt normal drinking. And when I went onto the paleo diet, that definitely changed. Like, a couple of things changed. I was on Adderall too for chronic fatigue, and my response to Adderall changed. So instead of being like, I never liked it, but instead of being like, I'm awake, I have energy, I kind of got numb, and my sense of humor got dampened, and I got like uncomfortable. It was like, oh, okay, so stop the Adderall, because that's not a good response. My response to psychiatric medications changed when I went on, it was like a keto paleo diet, like I said, and the antidepressants like stopped working. My dad had the same experience, and I definitely reduced my alcohol consumption. So I will drink a bit now, but I hardly ever drink. Like, I hardly ever drink. If friends come over once a month, plus I just had a baby, it's probably once a month, and I don't drink the same amount as I used to drink. That's interesting, though. I hadn't heard of that, because I really did feel normal drinking.
Did you do you notice now that you need less alcohol to get a buzz?
Oh my gosh, yeah. Like I said, as soon as I cut out carbs, the hangover was worse. I think because the first couple of times I drank the same amount as I used to drink when I was drinking carbs or eating carbs, and it was a disaster. So yes, very small amounts, pretty severe hangover. So it's very rare. Yeah,
it would make sense. I mean, if you could kind of have to theorize here, but if you visualize it or illustrate it as, let's say the mitochondria is not getting the amount of energy or it's not producing the amount of energy that it needs, right? But if alcohol allows that mitochondria in the brain to at least function normally.
That's crazy. I can't believe I haven't heard of this.
If you're plugging that in with ketones versus alcohol, then when you do have alcohol on top of that, you're already there. You don't need to. So for example, if your mitochondria was like a sink and you needed to have alcohol just to get that mitochondria to like fill up to normal, and this is completely scientifically inaccurate, I'm just illustrating a point, to fill up to a specific point, right? Well, then you would need more alcohol above and beyond that to actually get sort of the time dilation, all the other effects that would come with alcohol, and any euphoric feelings or any sort of impairment, right? So this just gets me to baseline. I'm a functioning alcoholic. I need this much to get to here. So then I have to drink above and beyond that. If you are already here because your body's producing ketones, it would make sense that you'd only need this much alcohol to feel it versus having to fill this bucket and then tip over. Your bucket's already filled and now you're just tipping over. I don't know if that makes any sense at all.
No, it does. This reminds me too. So my brother, who's like the healthy one in our family, when he drank when we were younger, he'd get tired. Like he'd have some drinks and he'd get tired. And when I drank, I'd get energized, like awake, finally awake. And when I cut out all the carbs and went to this paleo diet, and it's even more intense on like just eating meat, I got tired when I drank. And I was like, is that the normal response to alcohol? I had no idea why. It was just like, it's not the same. It's like what happened with Adderall and what happened with psych meds is like they changed So that's interesting.
Yeah,
that makes sense. That's cool.
I'll send you the clip on
Thank
that
you
one.
for that.
It's super interesting. It's mind blowing. And he's not someone that's just like a fly by night random, psychiatrist. Like
No.
Chris Palmer is, he is a teaching instructor, like actually trains the professors at Harvard, which, he's definitely got some serious clout behind him. And, I know people have what they have to say about Harvard, and this guy kind of opposes the general view of what people would think Harvard is all about. So the fact that he has credibility in a university where a lot of people don't really take what they say seriously anymore, it sort of satisfies both sides. It's like, okay, this guy makes sense to this community and to this community. Something he's saying is accurate. But with ketones, it's so interesting because like with what someone does on a traditional ketosis diet or ketogenic diet versus say what you're doing, I think some people, when they start just straight up ketosis, like whether they're, let's say they're not doing carnivore, they get this influx of ketones, which has a, neuro or neuroinflammation effect, right? So you're getting like that effect. And that probably allows them to feel X amount better. But when you take it a step further and go the route you're going, you're also adding the elimination aspect of it. So like if you look at AIP, autoimmune paleo, you're removing a lot of things, so you're getting the benefit of elimination, but you're not getting the actual, I'm going to go out on a limb and call it a healing effect of having ketones present, right? So you're only scratching the surface. You're eliminating with no potential for correcting or no potential for actually having what's called the histone deacetylase inhibition, where you can actually repair. I don't know if that makes sense. You're getting like one side, whereas with what you're doing, you're producing ketones and you're having elimination. So it makes sense that you're going to feel significantly better than someone that is following just a standard ketogenic diet.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, like, I mean, thank God I came across this, because it was just, like I said, out of necessity. And I was just randomly cutting things. Like for some reason I knew when I ate meat, I didn't seem to have arthritic reactions or any psychiatric reactions or like skin reactions. And so I got to a certain point where I was like, well, I know meat's safe, and it appears as if everything else is not safe. So I'll just do that for a while. So when I first got on it in December 2017, my plan was to do it for 6 weeks and to start reintroducing foods. And so when my depression lifted, which was about 6 weeks in, and I still didn't feel that good, but I felt better and I wasn't crying in the morning, I tried to reintroduce olives, and they were like the organic olives that are only olives. Like there's nothing else in them. I love olives. Okay. I love olives. And it could have been pickles. I really like pickles too. But then there was the probiotic element, and I was like, I just want like a food. No one's allergic to olives. Like everyone drinks olive or eats olive oil and everything. And I had a horrible 2.5 week long inflammatory reaction from eating these olives. And then that was enough for me to be like, okay, not that again. I'm just going to stick with this and see what happens. And then 5 months later, I was just like I said, I felt like I was in heaven.
If there was one food that you could bring back into your diet,
cucumbers.
Really?
Oh my gosh, yeah. Cucumbers, because then you get pickles as well. I love cucumbers.
Interesting. That's one food. So, you could have chose ice cream. You could have chose
pickles.
Okay.
Pickles or cucumbers. Ideally both, yeah.
So if there was one meat that you could add back into your diet, it definitely wouldn't be lamb, but...
It'd be chicken wings.
Okay.
I like chicken wings. And if I eat chicken and it's sourced from the right places, it's not too bad. It's not like eating a plant food. I just don't feel very good. It's not very satiating. Like the diet kind of sucked the joy out of chicken.
I was going to ask you if you notice a difference, like if you tried just eating chicken skin.
Oh, I love chicken skin.
Or versus, because it's like, sometimes there's so much methionine and so much in chicken breast and the actual meat of chicken. I'd be curious what would happen if you just ate chicken skin, just as an experiment. But it's just because it's really just fat, and you're not having nearly as much of the thiamine and these other things that might be kind of throwing sort of the B vitamin scale off. That kind of just be interesting. I know a number of people that are really sensitive to chicken, and it's kind of funny, just as random to compare you to a dog, but we had a dog that could not eat chicken. Could not, he would just start wheezing, right? It was case in point, right? That all creatures are going to have sensitivities to different foods. We have to feed him a beef kibble. If we feed him a chicken or a turkey or any poultry kibble, he's got this horrible wretched wheeze and cough. And we're trying to figure it out. We spent thousands of dollars trying to figure out what's wrong with him. Doctors still don't know. They put him on steroids and this and that. 18-year-old dog. And then, but the moment that we would just feed him beef or beef kibble that had nothing else in it but beef, he was totally fine. But I experimented and tried giving him, I'm going to give him some chicken skin and kind of see what happens. And nothing happened with chicken skin. But if he had actual chicken, then he would wheeze. I totally would be speculating and pulling it out of the side of my mouth if I tried to say like, hey, it's because of this. But I'm just curious because the fat profile is so much different in chicken than it is in beef as well.
That's interesting. Okay, I'm going to try that because I like chicken skin. I think most of my reactions come from, rather than some sort of imbalance after eating them, I think they come from an inflammatory, like almost allergic reaction to eating them. That's what it feels like anyway. It's fast. Yeah. Like you'd think if it was a disbalance in some way, it would take a number of days, and it's usually like right after I eat it. And I'm like, uh-oh, this didn't go well. And then it just continues to go downhill. But it's pretty fast.
Yeah. Do you ever get like a sort of congestion and like puffiness from it as far as or itchy eye, almost like allergic type effects?
100%, not really with the itchy eyes, but yes, with the puffy face. My face just morphs when I eat certain foods. So puffy face, sometimes restricted breath, and sometimes an itchy mouth. So it does feel like an allergic reaction. Sometimes I don't get the itchy mouth. Like that happens with soy really badly. And it's just like slow mental torture over a number of days.
Totally. Well, Mikhaila, where can people hear more about the Lion Diet, where they can find you, where they can watch you, etc.?
So I've got my main channel, which is Mikhaila Peterson. That's my podcast. Lion Diet information is on the Lion Diet on YouTube, and that like mostly caters to people who are severely chronically ill. Otherwise, I think you can get away with like keto or AIP or something like that. And then liondiet.com has information for free, tons of recipes, how to get into the diet, how to wean out of the diet, and my Instagram, which is Mikhaila Peterson.
Perfect. Nice.
On this video, it's so amazing to see the experience Mikhaila had on the carnivore diet, how her life changed. I just, want to share this information with you. If you feel that this diet, it's something that you would like to try, if you have anything that is, I want to thank you for watching this video. If you can subscribe the channel, give your like, leave any comments, share this video with someone you like. I will really appreciate that. Thank you very much.